He thought he married the perfect engineer's wife. Then she started glowing violet at night. On a dying frontier world with unexplained energy anomalies, Liam Rodriguez is about to discover his wife isn't human, but what she really is could either save their colony or consume it. The mystery builds from their first kiss to a revelation that rewrites what survival means on Kepler 442c. The shuttle coughed its way through the thick particulate haze of Kepler 442c's upper atmosphere, metal joints groaning under the strain. Technodust caked the viewport in a gritty purple film. Inside, Liam Rodriguez watched the patterns form and dissolve, thinking about beaches that didn't exist. He'd pictured white sand, warmth, a real honeymoon. What stretched below was a grid of gray domes and humming conduit towers under a bruised sky. 2 moons, one ice-white, one violet, hung like mismatched eyes. Romantic if your idea of romance included air scrubbers and industrial lighting. His wife sat beside him, perfectly still. Seraphine. She hadn't flinched during the bumpy descent. Not once. Her hands rested in her lap, calm as still water. The shuttle could have been breaking apart and she'd probably just adjust the temperature controls. Liam caught the sharp angle of her ear, just visible through her hair. Distinctive. He'd noticed it back on Earth, thought it was some genetic quirk. Charming. Here, under the weird light, it looked less like a quirk and more like a design feature. They'd met through a corporate matching service. Not a dating app, a talent acquisition program. Her profile was sparse. Lucrative 3-year terraforming contract with spousal accommodation. He was an engineer. She was an asset. The deal made sense on paper. Steady work, a new world, a partner who understood the life. The marriage license felt like a dotted line on an employment form. He signed it. He thought he was getting a colleague. A companion for the long nights. Someone to share the silence with. The shuttle settled onto the landing pad with a final metallic sigh. The hydraulics hissed. Through the dusty viewport, Liam watched a team in gray enviro suits move toward them. Their movements efficient, closed off. No welcoming committee. Just a maintenance check. Seraphine stood, smoothing her trousers. Ready? Her voice was even. Always even. He'd never heard her raise it, not even in argument. It was one of the things he liked. Now it felt notable, sure, he said. Paradise awaits, she didn't smile. Just inclined her head, a minute gesture he'd come to recognize as her version of amusement. The hatch cracked open. The air that rushed in was cool, sterilized, and carried the sharp tang of ozone and lubricant. No salt, no humidity, just recycled bitterness. He stepped out onto the graded platform. The colony sprawled before him, a monument to function. Every surface was hard, every angle calculated for efficiency. The domes weren't homes. They were habitats. The walkways weren't streets. They were access routes. It was a machine built for survival, and it whirred with a low, anxious hum. It felt fragile. That was the word. Not new, not pioneering. Fragile. Like one blown circuit could unravel the whole thing. Seraphine stepped down beside him. She took a slow, deep breath, her eyes scanning the infrastructure. The power conduits, the atmospheric processors, the comms array. She didn't look at the stark landscape or the strange sky. She looked at the wiring. A man in a crisp, off-white uniform approached, datapad in hand. Rodriguez? Logistics. Your quarters are in Dome 7. Your wife's contract briefing is scheduled for 800 tomorrow. Maintenance rotation assignments will be posted. Liam nodded. Right, thanks. The man's eyes flicked to Seraphine, then back to his screen. No welcome, no small talk. Just procedure. Liam looked at his wife. She was staring past the logistics officer, her gaze fixed on a large, silent structure half a click away. The main life support generator. Her expression was one of pure, unadorned focus. Not curiosity, recognition. The honeymoon was over before the bags were unpacked. This wasn't a vacation. It was a diagnostic, a puzzle box made of metal and fear, and his new wife seemed to already know where all the pieces fit. The shuttle doors hadn't opened onto a beach. They'd opened onto a question. The first livestock death was written off as bad luck. The second raised eyebrows. By the third, the colony had a pattern, and patterns on a fragile world meant protocols. The animals weren't attacked. They weren't sick. They just dropped. Sheep, a few small bovines, all dead. No marks, no blood. No sign of a struggle. They looked like machines someone had unplugged. Dr. Maria Vasquez, the colony's xenobiologist, did the autopsies in a sealed lab that smelled of antiseptic and quiet dread. She wasn't a squeamish woman. She'd seen parasites, radiation burns, aggressive flora. This was different. Her scans showed no toxin, no pathogen, no physical trauma. The cellular structure was intact, but the energy was gone. She called it a molecular drain, like something had siphoned the life out of them at the most fundamental level, leaving empty husks behind. The security team swept the pens. They found nothing. No tracks, no fur, no alien droppings. But the biosensors told a stranger story. They picked up fleeting energy signatures, brief and intense, that flickered around the containment areas, always at night. The readings didn't match any known life form. They were clean, sharp, and moved with a purpose the scanners couldn't map. They left no heat trail, no residual radiation, just a ghost in the machine, a spike on a graph that vanished before anyone could get a lock. The initial theory was indigenous life, something native to 442C, something that had evolved to hunt without leaving a trace. But the sensor pings clustered only around high bioelectric sources, the livestock pens, the hydroponic gardens, the medical bay during peak activity. It wasn't random. It was feeding. Amid the growing unease, Seraphine was a pocket of unnerving calm. She volunteered in the cantina, organizing the limited supplies with an efficiency that bordered on prescience. She charmed the cook, a dour man named Gregor, into baking a chocolate cake from synthesized ingredients. The whole dome smelled like synthetic cocoa and baked sweetness. People gravitated toward her. She listened, nodded, offered a quiet word. She never seemed tired, never stressed. The low-grade panic that gripped the colony simply flowed around her. Liam watched her. He'd come to find her, to share the troubling news about the livestock, and found her dusting flour from her hands, a faint, content smile on her lips. The contrast was jarring. Outside, creatures were being drained of life by an invisible force. In here, his wife was perfecting dessert. "Did you hear about the sheep?" he asked, leaning against the stainless steel counter. She glanced up, her eyes clear and focused. "Dr. Vasquez's report?" "Yes, curious. Curious is one word for it. People are starting to talk about ghosts. Or demons." She picked up a mixing bowl, examining it for spots. Fear is a natural response to the unknown, but it rarely leads to useful answers. She placed the bowl in the sanitizer. "The energy patterns are the key." "Not superstition." He straightened. "You've seen the sensor logs?" A brief glance. "The focus is on physical intruders. They should be looking at energy transfer. The question isn't what killed them. It's what took the energy and what it's used for." Her tone was so matter-of-fact, so clinical. It was the same tone she used to discuss atmospheric processors or power couplings. Liam felt a cold knot form in his stomach. This wasn't the easy companionship he'd signed up for. This was something else. His technical curiosity, the thing that made him a good engineer, sharpened into a needlepoint of suspicion aimed directly at his wife. Her knowledge was too specific. Her calm was too absolute. The colony's mystery was no longer an agricultural problem. It was a physics problem. A question of how life could be converted into pure energy, siphoned away without a trace, and what kind of intelligence would do it. The farming report on Liam's datapad felt suddenly childish. They weren't dealing with a predator. They were dealing with a thief. A ghost that fed on the very spark of life itself, and his wife seemed to understand its diet better than anyone. Liam tried to run a standard background verification on his wife. Standard procedure for adding a spouse to his colony housing and medical benefits. The system asked for her Earthside ID registry, her education transcripts, her employment history. He input the codes she'd given him. The console spun for a moment, then returned a single line of text. No records found. He tried again. Same result. He widened the parameters, searching for any Seraphine matching her approximate age and biometrics across the core terrestrial databases. Birth records, citizenship logs, even commercial flight manifests. Nothing. It was like she'd never existed before stepping onto the shuttle with him. In a universe where every breath is logged and every purchase is tracked, his wife was a ghost. He brought it up over dinner in their small quarters. Reconstituted protein and hydrated greens. She chewed slowly, watching him. He kept his voice light. "The system's having trouble pulling your files. Said it can't find you." She didn't blink. The corporate contracting agency handles all that. They use proprietary encryption for field personnel. It doesn't always interface well with colonial administration systems. She took a sip of water. Bureaucracy, it was a good answer. A plausible answer. It was the kind of answer a person who knew how systems worked would give. But it felt too clean. Too prepared. Liam nodded, pushing his food around the plate. Her past wasn't just private. It was deliberately, professionally opaque. She had materialized in his life with a starter kit of believable stories and a startling ease with the gaps in her own history. A few days later, Dr. Vasquez pulled him aside outside the medbay. Her expression was tight, professional curiosity warring with confusion. She had Seraphine's mandatory entry physical results on her datapad. Her vitals are unusual, Vasquez said, keeping her voice low. Her core temperature runs a consistent 3 degrees below human standard. Heart rate is steady at 45 beats per minute, even during light exertion. No fluctuation. She scrolled. The genetic screening came back. The markers are too complicated. The lab AI flagged them as potential old Earth modifications. Liam frowned. Modifications? Like gene therapy? Vasquez gave a slight, frustrated shake of her head. That's just it. The term is a catch-all in the database for anomalies the system can't classify. It's supposed to cover archaic genetic engineering from the early diaspora era, but the patterns don't match any known modification profile. They're coherent, purposeful. It's like the system found a signature it's supposed to recognize but doesn't. She looked down the corridor, toward the cantina where Seraphine was likely organizing next week's menu. The phrase doesn't mean what it says. That evening, Liam tried a different approach. They were in their quarters, the lights set to a low evening sim. He sat on the edge of their bunk, watching her as she stood by the viewport, looking out at the violet moon. Maria Vasquez said your physical came back a little odd, he said carefully. Seraphine didn't turn. Did it? Low body temp. Slow pulse. She called it a metabolic profile she hadn't seen before. She was silent for a moment. I've always run cold, she said. Her voice was quiet, almost distant. He pushed. And the energy? You're always on. I never see you tired. Even after a double shift on the conduit repairs. Everyone else is dragging. You look like you just woke up. Now she turned. Her face was calm, but her eyes were deeply focused. I process energy efficiently. It's a trait. It's more than a trait, Fina. It's notable. Vasquez is talking about metabolic disorders or other things. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It wasn't warm. It was assessing. Other things? She walked toward him, her movements fluid and precise. She placed her hand against his cheek. Her skin was cool, not the cool of a room, but the cool of stone deep underground. Yet beneath that coolness he felt a faint, thrumming vitality. I feel the same as I always have, she said. Her thumb stroked his skin once, gently. The cold doesn't bother me. The fatigue doesn't either. It's just how I'm built. He looked into her eyes. He saw the woman he'd married. He saw intelligence and a strange, deep patience. He also saw a mystery so profound it felt like looking into a well with no bottom. The tenderness was real. The suspicion was now a physical weight in his chest. Dr. Vasquez's speculation echoed in his mind. A metabolic disorder was a simple human answer. But the genetic markers said otherwise. The zero footprint said otherwise. The energy readings around the dead livestock said otherwise. She wasn't just a woman with an unusual physiology. She was a question wrapped in familiar skin, and the question was getting louder every time she deflected with that breezy, infuriating competence. The perfect wife was a locked box, and he was starting to realize he didn't have the key. He only had the growing certainty that whatever was inside wasn't from any world he knew. The alarm wasn't a shriek. It was a low, guttural groan that shuddered through the deck plates, the sound of a large machine dying a slow, painful death. It was the oxygen generator. The main one. The sound woke Liam from a shallow sleep, the kind you get when you're waiting for bad news. The ambient air already tasted thin, sharp. The numbers on the wall panel were dropping. Not fast, not yet, but steady. He pulled on his trousers and boots, Seraphine already moving beside him, swift and silent. They met a stream of other night shifters in the corridor, all heading the same way, faces tight with that specific dread reserved for life support failures. The control room was chaos under fluorescent lights. Two engineers were arguing over a schematic. their voices edged with panic. A third was just staring at the main console, running the same diagnostic over and over, getting the same useless result. The system was caught in a feedback loop, a cascading error that was slowly strangling the air supply. They couldn't isolate the fault. They couldn't bypass it. Every standard procedure had failed. Liam stepped up to the console, his own training kicking in. He traced power flows, checked regulator sequences. Nothing. The system logic was a tangled knot. It was like trying to find a single broken thread in a blanket of static. Then Seraphine was there. She didn't ask for permission. She just shouldered past the stunned engineer and placed her hands on the console, not typing, not tapping commands. Her fingers rested flat on the cool metal surface, her eyes sliding shut for a second. Her expression was one of deep, profound listening. When her eyes opened, they were fixed on a secondary display most people ignored, a raw data stream of environmental variables. "It's not in the primary operating system," she said, her voice calm, cutting through the panic. "There's a secondary subroutine, a hidden one. It's interfacing directly with the atmospheric sensors." The lead engineer, a man named Chen, shook his head. "There is no secondary subroutine. The schematics don't show anything like that." "She's right," Liam said, staring at the data. He could see it now. A subtle pattern in the noise he'd dismissed as background error, a pattern she'd seen instantly. Seraphine's fingers began to move, not on the main keyboard, but on a tertiary input panel. Her touches light and precise. She wasn't operating the machine. She was communicating with it. Her movements had the fluid certainty of a surgeon closing a wound. Lines of complex code, unlike any colonial programming Liam had ever seen, scrolled up a side screen. "See?" she murmured, more to herself than to them. "It's stuck. A recursive decision tree. It's trying to optimize for 17 different environmental variables simultaneously. Pressure differentials, particulate density, trace gas ratios. It's overwhelmed. It can't resolve the conflicts. So it's defaulting to a safety loop that's choking the output." She isolated the rogue process not by shutting it down, but by rewriting its parameters on the fly, her fingers a blur. She spoke to it in a language of energy flows and harmonic balances, her instructions weaving through the system's logic like she was untangling a knot by feeling each individual strand. The groan from the generator deepened for a moment, a sound of protest then smoothed into a steady, healthy hum. The oxygen percentage on the main display stabilized, then began a slow, steady climb back into the green. The control room was silent except for the hum of properly functioning machinery. 4 engineers stared at Seraphine. She withdrew her hands from the console, flexing her fingers slightly. She turned to Liam, a faint, almost mischievous glint in her eye. "You rely too much on the manuals, my love. They only show you the map. They don't show you the terrain." Chen finally found his voice. "How did you—" "What was that interface? I've never seen that code." "It's an older protocol," she said, her tone breezy, dismissive. "Predates the standard colonial packages. More intuitive." She smiled at Liam, a real smile this time, warm and knowing. Sometimes you have to listen to what the machine is trying to tell you, not just what you're telling it to do. The crisis was over. The air lost its metallic bite. The crew began to murmur, shuffling back to their stations, throwing glances at the woman who had just rewritten their understanding of the colony's core systems in under 3 minutes. Liam just looked at her. He looked at her hands, which had read a machine's failing heart like a doctor taking a pulse. He looked at her face, which showed no pride, no strain, just a quiet satisfaction. Her technical prowess had just saved them from suffocating in their sleep. It was essential. It was also impossible. The mystery of his wife was no longer a quiet suspicion. It was a roaring in his ears. How do you diagnose a complex machine like you're reading its mind? How do you see code that isn't there? How do you talk to circuits like they're a living thing? The questions weren't academic anymore. They were a weight in the room, thick as the air they'd almost lost. She had kept them breathing, and in doing so, she had made the silence between them absolutely unbearable. The emergency klaxon didn't just sound. It tore through the colony's fabric, a raw metallic shriek that bypassed the ears and went straight for the spine. This was Jenkins on the comm. His usual bureaucratic drone sanded down to a sharp edge of pure alarm. A Class 7 solar storm. Planetary evacuation level, 4 hours to impact. The words landed like physical blows. Everyone knew what that meant. Total systems collapse. Global power grids frying. Atmospheric processors overloading and failing. A slow, silent death in the dark. waiting for a rescue that would never come in time. In the control hub, the main display lit up with a flood of critical failure warnings. Oxygen production was already down to 15%. The math was simple and brutal. They had 4 hours before the storm hit, and maybe 6 hours of air left after that if the processors flatlined. Sarah Chen, the youngest engineer on the night shift, recited the numbers in a flat, hollow voice. She looked about 18 years old. Liam watched the data streams, his mind automatically running through disaster protocols he knew were useless. You can't shield a whole colony from a star's tantrum. You just ride it out or you die. But then the numbers did something they shouldn't have. The atmospheric processors, which should have been spiking into the red and tripping emergency shutoffs, weren't failing. Their output was erratic, chaotic, but the systems weren't shutting down. Instead, they were synchronizing, not in a clean, engineered way. It was messier than that, deeper. The readouts showed complex harmonic frequencies resonating through the planet's crust itself, a vibration that wasn't on any schematic. It was like listening to a machine sigh in its sleep. A larger, hidden mechanism was waking up beneath their feet, beneath the colony's fragile skin of metal and polymer. He turned to find Seraphine. She was standing apart from the panic, her back to the room, facing the main viewport. The sky outside was doing things a sky shouldn't do. Auroras in electric violet and cobalt blue snaked across the blackness, a light show with no atmosphere to support it. The electromagnetic interference was off the charts, a screeching wall of energy that was turning every circuit and every living nerve ending up to 11. "Fina," he said. She turned, and Liam's breath caught. Her skin had taken on a soft internal luminescence, a violet light that seemed to glow from within her cells. It pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm. Her eyes were no longer the familiar gray-green he knew. They shone with the same otherworldly light, 2 points of brilliant amethyst. She looked radiant. She looked terrifying. She looked like she was made of the storm itself. "The electromagnetic field," she said. Her voice was different, layered. It had the same calm core, but now it hummed with a new power, a vibration that matched the frequencies shaking the deck under their feet. "It's awakening things in me that I've been suppressing for months." She didn't sound scared. She sounded relieved, like she'd been holding her breath since the day she arrived and could finally let it out. The woman he married was gone. In her place stood something else, something more. The mystery he'd been trying to solve was now standing right in front of him, glowing. The solar storm wasn't the crisis anymore. It was the crucible. It was the thing that was forcing the truth out into the open, burning away the human disguise she'd worn so perfectly. The fight to save the colony was no longer about rerouting power or reinforcing bulkheads. The enemy wasn't the storm raging outside. The enemy was the ignorance inside these walls. Their ignorance of what she was, of what this planet was, of what was really possible. Liam just looked at her. The glowing woman who fixed oxygen generators by touch. The woman with no past. The woman who never got tired. The strange energy signatures that moved through the colony at night, draining the livestock, leaving no trace. He understood now. They weren't a predator. They were a symptom. They were her, bleeding energy she'd been forced to contain. The ghost in the machine had a face now, and it was the face of his wife illuminated by a light that didn't come from any sun. The question wasn't what was happening to the colony. The question was what was happening to her, and what she would choose to do about it now that she was finally fully awake. The control room hummed with a different frequency now. Less panic, more raw astonishment. The storm still raged outside, painting the viewport in violent streaks of light, but the air in the room was stable. The oxygen percentage held steady in the green. Seraphine stood at the center of it all, the violet luminescence under her skin pulsing in time with the deep, resonant thrum of the planetary system she was conducting. She looked at Liam, her glowing eyes holding his, and the last of the human pretense fell away. "We share energy," she said. Her voice was clear, layered with the harmonic hum of the machinery. "My people, the Nixari, we absorb and process bioelectric energy. It is not predation. It is a symbiotic need, woven into the life cycles of other species." She gestured with one hand, a fluid motion that seemed to trace the energy flows in the air itself. "On my world we had partners, animals, plants. Their life force was a currency. We took only what was offered, what they could spare in their natural cycles, and in return we gave them protection, guidance, a harmony they could not achieve alone. The exchange kept the entire ecosystem in balance. Liam just stared, the pieces of the last few months clicking into a terrifying, coherent whole. The dead livestock, the elevated neurotransmitters associated with deep sleep. She hadn't been killing them. She'd been taking a sip, a necessary draw of energy from beings whose consciousness was simple enough to not feel the loss as a theft. She tried to be careful, tried not to cause suffering. And their bond, their marriage. He thought of his own energy levels these past months, how he never felt truly drained, how complex engineering problems seemed to solve themselves in his mind with a new clarity. He'd thought it was happiness, contentment, it was feeding. Their closeness had been quietly sustaining her, a low-level transfer he hadn't even noticed. He hadn't been loving a wife. He'd been fueling a star. She'd said the storm was awakening things in her. It was also awakening the planet. Her consciousness, no longer suppressed, was expanding, flowing out of her and into the colony's network. He could see it on the displays. She wasn't just running the atmospheric processors, she was harmonizing them. Her hands rested lightly on the main console, not typing, just feeling. She was a conductor standing before an electromagnetic orchestra, her will guiding the systems to play in a perfect, stable chord against the cacophony of the solar storm. The processors weren't just surviving. They were performing at an efficiency the designers had never dreamed possible. The romantic mystery of his ethereal wife shattered. It was replaced by something vaster, a planetary-level partnership he was only beginning to comprehend. Human technology and alien life weren't just cooperating. They were fusing. Her understanding of energy wasn't technical. It was biological, instinctual. She didn't see circuits and code. She saw a circulatory system, a nervous system, and she knew how to make it well. The initial draw can be intense, she admitted, her gaze never leaving his, for a new bond. It requires a significant initial investment of energy to establish the connection, like igniting an engine. The animals, their systems were too simple to regulate the transfer. I am sorry for that. But with a conscious partner, with you, it is a conversation, a sharing. I take only what you can give without harm, and in return you receive clarity, focus, a deeper connection to the living systems around you. It rewrote everything. The vampire myth, the idea of a monster that sucks life away, was broken. This was symbiosis, a trade. She wasn't a parasite. She was a catalyst. The livestock deaths were a tragic miscalculation, a failure to find a suitable partner in a sterile, human-built environment. But with him, it was working. The bond was established. The hunger wasn't a bottomless pit. It was a circuit, and it needed to be completed. Liam looked from her glowing face to the status boards, all green, all stable. The colony was surviving a Class 7 solar storm because his alien wife was conducting the planet's energy like it was a symphony. The fear he'd felt curdled into a dazed, staggering awe. The payoff wasn't in understanding a monster. It was in understanding a new form of life. Her people's hunger worked like respiration. They inhaled bioelectric energy, processed it and exhaled it as coordination, stability, and a heightened state of being for everything connected to them. It wasn't theft. It was photosynthesis for consciousness. She'd been starving herself to fit in, to appear human, and her suppressed energy had leaked out in uncontrolled ways, causing the very damage she sought to avoid. Now fully expressed, fully connected, she wasn't a threat to the colony. She was the only thing holding it together. The resolution was as simple as it was profound. The monster was a myth. The symbiont was real, and she had been waiting for a partner willing to listen, not with fear, but with the same curiosity that had driven him to the stars in the first place. The circuit was now closed, and the energy flowing through it was saving them all. Liam watched Seraphine's hands on the console. They weren't just operating it. They were part of it. Her skin pulsed with that soft violet light, fused to the metal, and the data streams on the screens flowed like extensions of her own nervous system. The storm was still hammering the dome, but the air was clean. The lights were steady. She was holding it all together by sheer will, by a biology none of them understood. Chen was staring, mouth slightly open. Vasquez was taking notes with shaking hands. They were spectators at a miracle they couldn't explain. Liam looked at his wife. He saw the strain around her glowing eyes. She was a single point of failure, a bridge between their world and hers, and the weight of it was immense. The choice wasn't complicated. It was inevitable. He moved before anyone could formulate a protest, before Chen could grab his arm or Vasquez could shout a warning. He stepped up beside her. The interface panel she was connected to was warm, humming with a deep subaudible frequency that vibrated through the soles of his boots. He didn't ask. He just placed his hands flat on the metal surface beside hers. The shock wasn't pain. It was an overload. A fire hose of raw information blasted into his mind. He felt the planet, not as rock and atmosphere, but as a living circuit. He felt the deep geothermal veins like slow, powerful currents. He felt the magnetic field twisting under the solar onslaught, a shield she was actively reinforcing. He felt the colony's infrastructure not as separate machines, but as nerve endings in a single vast body. The oxygen generator was a lung. The water recyclers were kidneys. The power grid was a circulatory system, and Seraphine was the heart, the brain, the central nexus holding it all in a fragile, perfect harmony. His own consciousness, his own sense of self dissolved. It didn't vanish. It merged. Her presence was there, not as a separate entity, but as a vast, calm intelligence that his own mind flowed into. There was no need for words. Thoughts, sensations, memories, and pure data became one shared stream. He felt her relief as his energy joined hers, a new link in the network, strengthening the whole. He felt the months of her isolation, the constant draining effort of suppression. He felt her careful, guilty siphons from the livestock. He felt her deep, abiding affection for him, a feeling that was now a tangible thing, a warm current in the cold flood of information. What had been two beings, a man and an alien wife, blended into a single planetary-scale consciousness. They were the colony. They were the systems. They were the storm and the shield against it. Dr. Vasquez watched, her scientific detachment crumbling. She saw Liam's body go rigid, his eyes lose focus. She saw the bio-readouts on her portable scanner spike into impossible ranges, his brain activity syncing perfectly with the energy patterns flowing from Seraphine into the console. It wasn't a human reading anymore. It was something else, a fusion. Biology and technology weren't just interfacing. They were becoming indistinguishable. The infrastructure around them ceased to be mere machinery. The conduits in the walls, the pipes under the floor, the antennas on the roof, they all became nodes, extensions of this new, shared mind. The network was awake. It was sentient, and it was responding to their need, to the human desire to live. With a cooperative intelligence that rewrote every rule of physics and psychology Vasquez had ever learned. The fragile outpost was no longer fragile. The hum of the life support wasn't the sound of a machine working. It was the sound of something breathing. It was alive. They were inside a living thing, and they were part of it. Liam didn't feel like he was controlling anything. He felt like he was everything. He could feel the atmospheric processors adjusting the oxygen mix for the sleeping children in Dome 4, lowering the light frequency to a more restful wavelength. He could feel the power relays diverting energy from non-essential lighting to reinforce the magnetic shielding over the livestock pens, a silent apology for past transgressions. The system didn't need commands. It understood intent. It responded to the collective, unspoken need of every colonist. Fear became a data point. Panic was a fluctuation to be smoothed. The desire for safety was a directive, clear and simple. The man who had married an alien was gone. In his place was a component of the alien world itself. His individuality wasn't lost. It was amplified, woven into a larger tapestry of consciousness that included his wife, the technology they'd built, and the very planet they stood on. The payoff wasn't just understanding her interface system. It was becoming it. The connection didn't show him how it worked. It made him a working part of it. The shock was the death of his old self and the birth of something new, a symbiotic mind where human thought and Nixari energy met and merged, creating a stability that no mere machine could ever achieve. The sterile gray soil beyond the dome's perimeter began to change. It didn't bloom with alien flowers. It grew structures, translucent crystalline lattices pushed up from the ground, geometric and precise, catching the light of the twin moons and the fading auroras. They pulsed with a soft internal bioluminescence, a gentle rhythm that was anything but random. Liam, standing at the viewport, felt a familiar thump in his own chest. He placed a hand over his heart, then against the cool transparisteel. The light patterns outside beat in perfect time with his pulse. The bond was no longer just a feeling. It was a physical fact written on the landscape itself. The planet was no longer a rock they occupied. It was a partner. It was responding. This new integration felt like magic to the colonists. Airflow in the domes stabilized, no longer the product of struggling fans but of subtle pressure differentials the living network orchestrated automatically. Radiation levels, even after the storm, dropped to safer lows as the planet's magnetic field seemed to focus its protection like a shield over their specific coordinates. Water reclamation hit 100% efficiency. Resource management ceased to be a daily crisis meeting and became a background process, handled by a planetary-scale consciousness that anticipated need before a request could be logged. It wasn't supernatural. It was engineering. Just engineering so advanced, so deeply intuitive and responsive, that it felt like the world was dreaming on their behalf. The distinction between the built environment and the natural one dissolved. The walls breathed. The floors hummed with purpose. The colonists slowly, cautiously began to recognize they weren't just living on Kepler 442c. They were part of it. They were cells in a larger body, and the body was awake. The old colonial bureaucracy, a tangled mess of Terran Authority regulations and emergency protocols, couldn't handle this. It was designed for problems. This was a state of being. Captain Morrison, the TCA representative, arrived for his weekly compliance review and found his clipboard useless. He watched a maintenance bot guided by the network repair a faulty conduit by growing a crystalline lattice around the break, fusing metal and mineral into a seamless whole. He saw the resource allocation charts. Perfectly balanced, zero waste, zero human input. He tried to file a report on unauthorized planetary modification. The system sent it back with a suggestion for a more accurate classification. After 3 days of this, Morrison called a meeting. He didn't stand at a podium. He sat at a common table in the cantina, his formal uniform looking out of place. "We are no longer a standard colonial outpost," he stated, his voice flat. The usual bureaucratic bluster was gone. He sounded tired and honest. "Our operating framework is obsolete. I am reclassifying this installation as a symbiotic experimental colony. Provisional joint species governance effective immediately. All previous Terran Authority directives are suspended pending a new collaborative framework." He looked at Liam, then at Seraphine. "You will define the new rules. We will learn them." It was the closest a career bureaucrat would ever get to a surrender. He wasn't endorsing them. He was endorsing the new, undeniable reality. The paperwork couldn't fight the planet. The rigid hierarchy of Terran command yielded to the fluid, sentient network that was now their life support, their home, and their government. The resolution was quiet. There was no vote, no debate. Bureaucracy faced with a living world simply gave up. This transformation from a dead rock to a conscious network wasn't the result of a singular event, but a cascading activation. The fusion of Liam's human consciousness with Seraphine's Nixari biology during the storm was the spark. It provided the complex template the dormant planetary systems needed, a blueprint of intent, of care, of a desire to protect and sustain. His humanity gave the planet's raw processing power a purpose. Her alien nature provided the interface, the language to speak to the deep geology and physics of the world. Together, they booted up a system that had been sleeping in the rock for millennia, a latent potential for integrated life. The planet didn't gain a voice. It always had one. It was just a language no one had been able to speak or understand, until a lonely engineer and his alien wife formed a circuit that could translate. The network didn't become conscious. It was always conscious. It was just waiting for a compatible operating system to come online. They provided the mind. The planet provided the body. And together they built a new kind of home. A human kid named Leo, maybe 8 years old, stood frowning at an atmospheric processor's access panel. It was making a faint, irregular whine. A few feet away, a Nixari child watched him, her head tilted. She had the same sharp ears and calm eyes as her mother. She didn't speak. She just started to hum, a low, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate in the metal grating under their feet. Leo stopped frowning. He listened. Then tentatively he hummed the same note back. The whine from the processor smoothed out, shifting into a clean, steady hum that matched their voices. They grinned at each other. There was no manual, no training. They'd just fixed a machine by singing to it. This was the new normal. The colony's economy wasn't about credits or rations anymore. It ran on energy, music, and the unspoken currency of mutual care. You helped tune a water reclaimer with a well-placed whistle. Someone else's kid would show yours how to make the lights in the greenhouse pulse in time with the growth cycles. It was a barter system of quiet sounds and shared focus. The water dispenser in the main common area started producing lemonade. Not the synthetic powder mix they'd been rationing. Real fresh-tasting lemonade, chilled and slightly fizzy. It happened without warning. One moment it was dispensing standard reclamated water. The next, a perfect glass of cold lemonade. A man named Evans took the first sip. He stared into the glass, then at the dispenser's nozzle. "Huh," he said. It was the kind of whimsical, inexplicable side effect that would have caused a panic weeks ago. Now it just got a shrug. The shared consciousness of the colony, the blend of human whimsy and Nixari efficiency, was expressing itself in small, delightful ways. The system was responding to a collective, half-formed desire for something that wasn't just functional. It was learning to play. The story wasn't about grand gestures anymore. It was about these small wrinkles of cross-cultural contact, handled with a gentle tenderness. A human teenager frustrated with a comms relay threw his wrench down. A young Nexari man picked it up, held it against the relay housing, and tapped it lightly with his fingernail. The resulting chime resonated through the metal. The static on the line cleared. The teenager blinked. "Thanks." The Nixari nodded. No big speech, just a shared fix for a shared problem. Misunderstandings still happened, but they didn't fester. The planetary network made thoughts and emotions vaguely shareable. A spike of human frustration would be met with a wave of Nixari patience. A moment of alien confusion would be answered with a pulse of human empathy. You didn't need words to apologize. You could just feel the intent. The jokes started soon after. They were light, a way to sand down the edges of the impossible. Gregor the cook held up a power cell that was glowing a soft, warm yellow. "Tastes like birthday cake," he declared to the lunch line. People chuckled. Someone else complained that the air in their quarters smelled like fresh-baked bread every morning. "First world problems," another colonist shot back. "Mine smells like a gym sock." The humor was a binding agent. It made the alien technology feel familiar, something to be teased and appreciated, not feared. A hopeful, deeply improbable cultural fusion was taking root. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and strange, but it worked. This rising sense of normalcy, this ability to joke about lemonade-flavored water, rested entirely on the larger, benevolent planetary mind they were all connected to. The network anticipated needs. It smoothed over conflicts before they could boil over. It guided their hands, their voices, their intentions toward harmony. Consciousness was no longer a solitary experience locked inside a single skull. It was a shared resource. It could be anticipated, guided, and woven into the physical fabric of their world. A gardener would have a thought about a plant needing more nitrogen, and the soil composition would begin to shift. A technician would worry about a stress fracture in a support beam, and a flow of smart material would already be heading to reinforce it. The colony had become an extension of their collective will. Survival stopped being a technical challenge to be solved by engineers and became a community project. And the community now included the planet itself. The payoff for the singing children wasn't magic. It was advanced physics, understood on an instinctual level by the Nixari. They were teaching the human kids the principles of cymatics, the ability of specific sound frequencies to influence and organize matter. The atmospheric processors, like all machinery, had resonant frequencies. A discordant whine was a sign of a component vibrating out of sync. The Nixari children, born into a culture that communicated with energy and resonance, could hear that dissonance. They could identify the precise note, the exact frequency, that would cancel out the bad vibration and bring the system back into harmony. They weren't casting spells. They were performing highly precise acoustic maintenance. They were teaching the humans to listen to the music of the machines, to hear the problems, and to sing them well. It was a language, and on Kepler 442c, it was becoming the mother tongue. The first refugee ship was a battered freighter, its hull pitted with micrometeor scars and patched with mismatched alloy plates. Its transponder code was from a colony on the verge of collapse, a mining operation that had run out of luck and oxygen in equal measure. They didn't ask for permission to land. They just transmitted a single repeating message. "We heard you had air to spare." Kepler 442c did. The atmosphere processors, guided by the shared consciousness of the network, didn't just sustain the original colonists. They produced a surplus, a clean, sweet abundance that felt like a permanent spring morning. Success on the frontier isn't a secret. It's a beacon. And the desperate have very good receivers. They came in ones and twos at first, then in small groups. Not conquerors, survivors. They stepped out of their dying ships and into an environment that felt less like an outpost and more like a sanctuary. The air didn't taste recycled. The light wasn't harsh. The ground itself felt stable in a way that went beyond geology. The Terran Colonial Authority took notice. Not with gunships or embargoes, but with a proposal. Captain Morris, in his uniform now looking more like a costume from a bygone era, presented the plans himself. The TCA wanted to build a dedicated research station adjacent to the main colony. Not to govern, to observe, to study. Their official communique used phrases like consciousness-based planetary management and symbiotic infrastructure. They weren't trying to take over. They were admitting they needed to learn. The colony's future was no longer just about survival. It had become the hinge point between cutting-edge science and the messy, hopeful reality of humanistic ideals playing out light years from home. It was a living laboratory, and the subjects were also the curators. The practical benefits were undeniable, and they became the colony's best advertisement. The enhanced metabolism wasn't a myth. Colonists needed less sleep, recovered from injury faster, and maintained focus through tasks that would have exhausted them before. This wasn't a superpower, it was a side effect of being a node in a healthy network, a constant low-level optimization of their own biological processes. Collaboration with machinery ceased to be a task. It became an extension of will. A farmer would think about a section of crops needing more water, and the irrigation system would adjust before the thought was fully formed. A technician with a complex repair would find their hands moving with an uncanny certainty, guided by an intuition that felt like memory. The machines weren't obedient. They were cooperative partners. This extended to the environment itself. Cosmic events, once existential threats, became manageable weather. The planetary network, a blend of human ingenuity, Nixari biology, and the planet's own latent consciousness, projected a protective umbrella. Solar radiation was deflected or absorbed. Meteor showers were nudged off course by subtle gravitational tweaks. Safety was no longer a hope whispered in the dark. It was a feature of the architecture, as reliable as the walls. The old world's bureaucracy didn't vanish. It just adapted in strangely specific ways. The colony's administration office, now staffed by a blend of humans and Nixari, still processed forms. You could apply for a permit to modify your living quarters. You could file a grievance. The insurance protocols were updated to include bizarre but necessary clauses. You could now purchase a policy that covered death by cosmic enlightenment or accidental neural fusion with non-terrestrial consciousness. The lawyers had a field day. The premiums were reasonable. It was a peculiar paper-based acknowledgement that their lives had expanded in ways no manual had predicted. This combination of profound change and mundane detail was what made the colony work. It was a prototype not because it was perfect, but because it was functional. It demonstrated that interspecies civilization wasn't about erasing differences, but about finding a new operating system where those differences became strengths. The human drive for structure and the Nixari fluency with energy found a common language in the living network of the planet itself. They weren't building a utopia. They were building a viable alternative to the slow failure of traditional colonization. Most fragile frontier outpost had become the most resilient home in the sector, precisely because it stopped seeing itself as separate from the frontier. It integrated with it. The colonists, the Nixari, the machines, and the planet's own systems became a single interdependent organism. Its success as a prototype wasn't measured in resource output or territorial expansion, but in its stability, its adaptability, and its ability to offer a refuge not just from physical danger, but from the existential loneliness of the void. It proved that the greatest resource wasn't minerals or energy, but connection. And that was a model that other failing colonies, looking up at the stars and searching for a sign, were desperate to emulate. They weren't just sending refugees. They were sending applications to the future. Liam and Seraphine stood on the observation platform, the twin moons hanging above them. One ice, one violet. The colony sprawled below, but it didn't look like a colony anymore. The gray domes were veined with soft, glowing filaments. The air processors hummed a steady, quiet song. There were no alarms, no frantic comms traffic. The place felt settled, complete. A celebration was happening in the main common area. Music, laughter, the smell of real food. But it wasn't for a victory. It was for a fact. They had succeeded. Not by conquering the world, but by joining it. 43 humans now lived here. A small number on paper, but they weren't just living on the world. They were threads woven into its fabric. Energy and life weren't separate systems anymore. They were a single braided cord. A human thought about a cool breeze and the vents in the dome would respond. A Nixari child feeling playful could make the pathway lights pulse in a gentle rhythm. The tension wasn't about survival. It was about learning the boundaries of this new intimacy, figuring out where one consciousness ended and the collective network began. It was a comfortable tension, the kind you feel in a crowded room full of friends. Seraphine leaned her head against Liam's shoulder. Her skin was warm now, holding only a faint memory of the violet glow like a banked hearth. Together, together, she murmured. It was a phrase that had started with them, a private joke about their fused state during the storm. It had slipped into the colony's language. You heard it in the cantina. Pass the salt, together, together. You heard it in engineering. Reroute the conduit, together, together. It wasn't just a saying. It was their founding principle. It described their marriage. It described their governance. It was the answer to every question. The air around them seemed to hold a harmonic, a faint lullaby-like hum that was a blend of the planet's deep geology and the colony's technology. It wasn't a sound you heard with your ears. It was a vibration you felt in your bones, a contented sigh from a world that was no longer alone. The story didn't end with a flag planted on a peak. It ended with this quiet hum, with a sense of profound settled wonder at what they had built, not through force but through connection. The triumph wasn't over an enemy. It was over isolation. The viewport on the landing bay lit up. Another ship. Smaller this time, a sleek corporate scout vessel, not a battered refugee freighter. It settled onto the pad with a whisper of thrusters. They watched as the hatch opened. A woman in a crisp, unfamiliar uniform stepped out, followed by a team carrying sensor arrays and data slates. They didn't look desperate. They looked intensely, professionally curious. The future wasn't just more refugees. It was more attention. More people coming to see the impossible thing they had built. More questions. More technologies born from this fusion that would seem like magic anywhere else. A civilization had learned to do something new. It had learned to dream with its planet, not just on it. Human imagination, with its drive and its heart, combined with Nixari perception, with its feel for energy and resonance, created a shared consciousness. They could shape their world with a thought, a feeling, a song. The line between a wish and a work order had blurred into irrelevance. Unity wasn't a political ideal here. It was a practical necessity, the keystone holding up the entire arch of their survival. They hadn't just built a coalition of species. They had built a new kind of organism, and its health depended on every part working in concert. The resolution was in the air they breathed, the light that grew their food, the stability under their feet. They had built it and it worked. The payoff for the shared thoughts and emotions wasn't a telepathic network. It was simpler and stranger. The planetary consciousness they were part of, a blend of geology, technology, Nixari biology, and human neurology, processes emotional and cognitive energy like a language. A spike of human frustration doesn't translate as words. It translates as a data point, a localized energy fluctuation that needs smoothing. The network responds not to the content of the thought, but to its emotional signature and intentional core. A desire for safety creates a subtle strengthening of structural integrity fields. A feeling of joy might nudge the atmospheric mix to release certain uplifting pheromones. It's a translation of pure feeling into physical reality, mediated by a system that understands need better than language. Your thoughts don't become public. Their emotional weight becomes a material fact, and the world adjusts to care for you. It's not mind reading. It's ecosystem-wide empathy, hardwired into the physics of the place. The honeymoon ended. The marriage didn't. It became something bigger than two people. It became a blueprint for a world. Kepler 442c proves a point quietly. The future out here isn't built on conquest. It's built on connection. on understanding that the stranger in the next bunk or the strange light in the sky might be the key, not the threat. So next time you look up, just wonder, not about what's out there to conquer, but about what's waiting to connect. The universe is a lot less empty when you stop looking for enemies